So yeah, I'm Adam. What was I gonna say? Grew up in a Christian family, and hearing all the things that Christian kids hear growing up in a Christian household, and always really struggled with the idea that God uses pain and suffering and He turns it around for good. I remember hearing that and thinking that's a real poetic note, but I don't buy it for a second. Grew up on the West Coast, out in California, and thank you, yeah, Bay Area. And if you'd have asked me 5 years where Iowa is, I probably would have said, you know, that's that big cornfield, right? Out in like the middle of the country, somewhere it's the cornfield, right? Right, yeah. But my wife is from that cornfield, and it's kind of a funny story how we met. We actually met on a plane. So it was an early morning flight out of Raleigh, North Carolina, flying to Atlanta. And then from there, I was flying out of the country. And I remember getting to the airport, getting to the gate that morning, super early in the morning. And there's this smoking hot girl sitting in the gate. And she looked so good. And I was like, man, who gets up that early and does, but now I know Caitlin gets up that early and does that. But I wasn't gonna talk to her. I just needed to get some sleep. I needed a rest. Anyway, so the plane starts boarding, and I go up to the gate agent real quick. And I said, hey, you know, I've got a long day ahead of me, a lot of travel coming. Is there any way you can get me a seat with some more leg room so I can try and get some sleep? And all she said to me was, I'm gonna hook you up. And so, yes, got a seat, business class, go to my seat, and there in the seat next to me is that girl. And I was like, I need to get some sleep. I'm not talking to her. I put my headphones in, I sit down, I'm like, you know, I'm just gonna take one headphone out, just in case. And I don't need to tell you how the rest of that story goes, because here I am with Caitlin in that cornfield. But there's more to the story. So the reason I was on that plane that morning, I was leaving the country. At the time, I was still in the military, and I was part of a team of guys. The work we did was all in Central and South America, so that's where I was headed. I was going to South America that day. And when I joined the military, that wasn't the job that I signed up to do. I actually didn't even know that job existed, never heard of those guys before. But a few years into my time in the Marine Corps, Master Sergeant pulled me into his office and he said, hey, Medina, they're putting together some guys for this team, and I thought of you, and he told me about the job, and I'm like, man, that sounds awesome. I would love to do that. And I asked him, I was like, well, why'd you think of me? He said, well, one, you'd probably pass the selection, and two, you're fluent in Spanish, right? I said, well, yeah, my dad is an immigrant from Uruguay, South America, and I grew up speaking native fluent Spanish, and that'd be a huge asset to the team, so yeah, let's do it. And, man, here we go. My time in the Marine Corps was probably some of the best times of my life, but also probably some of the hardest times in my life. I remember being scared a lot. And I remember having to see my friends die and going to their funerals and seeing the pain that was left for their wives and their families and thinking, man, God's not paying attention to this. There's no way. But I think back through that experience and through those years, and if I hadn't joined the Marine Corps and I hadn't been put on that team, I wouldn't have been on that plane, and I wouldn't have met Caitlin, and I wouldn't be here with y'all in this cornfield. Before the Marine Corps, I had a kind of a interesting upbringing. So I didn't know it then, but I know it now. I was born with this interesting defect in my body, and I'll just try to explain it real quick. So all of y'all's internals from here down are kind of neatly organized and properly packaged to function the correct way. And mine are more like if you took like a few gallons of paint and a canvas and it doesn't really work very well. And it went undiagnosed for like 20 some years. And as a kid, it caused me chronic, debilitating pain. I remember days in bed curled up because it hurt so much to move. And as I got older, it got worse. My parents didn't know what was going on. And so I started going to different doctors, different treatments, and nobody could figure it out. And by the time I was about 13 years old, doctors said, well, we can't figure this out, so it must not be medical, it must be mental. So at 13 years old, I started going through all of these different mental therapies and treatments, and I was in residential facilities and on different drugs until by the time I was 15 years old, I was on 24 different medications every single day. And if you've ever wondered what dead feels like, take a 15-year-old kid who doesn't have any mental health problems, has a medical problem, and give him 24 different psychotropic drugs every day. Some years later, that issue was finally diagnosed, and the doctor who diagnosed it was shocked that no one had seen it before, because he told me, he said, what you have is rare, but it's really easy to diagnose, and it's correctable within the first year of life. And most people who have it identify it within the first year of life, and they go on to live happy, pain-free lives. And I remember hearing that and feeling so angry and thinking back to all those years of pointless pain and just being really angry with a lot of people and with God. But what I didn't know then, that I know now, is that if that defect had been diagnosed early on, when I went to join the military years later, I would have been medically disqualified. And if I had been medically disqualified from the military, I wouldn't have been picked for that team. And if I hadn't been picked for that team, I wouldn't have been on that plane, and I wouldn't have met Caitlin, and I wouldn't be here with y'all. I wouldn't be expecting my son in 3 weeks. What I've learned through this short life that I've lived so far is that, looking back, it turns out that God has had me since day one of my life. And the pain and the suffering that I experienced was all for good. And I know now that when things are hard, when my job is tough, God's gonna turn it for good. I may not know when, but I know it's gonna happen. And so I would challenge you, if you are in a season of pain or suffering, or if you haven't figured out that God has had you since day one of your life, take a moment and pray and look back through your life, and I promise you will find that God has had you since day one.